welcome to Ekate's Crossing as we continue the Celestine Prophecy stories. This is a 10th insight by James Redfield. I totally recommend you get the books and read them properly. Reread them again at your own pace. I think they're a great source to have on hand. But anyway, let me share the 10th insight with you. Let's look at the sacred geometry cards. Let's see, what card are we going to focus on today as we begin the story with the 10th insight. Now, the card that we're looking at here is about receiving. So let's have a look and see what it means for receiving. So let's have a look here. Readiness, receptivity. This is the final card in Sacred Geometry cards for the Visionary pack. Embedded in the background of this image is stunning geometry that appeared as a crop formation in 2003. The figure is charged with readiness and receptivity. Her outstretched arms and open hand chakras are expressions of trust, openness, and infinite potential. She is a lightning rod and receptor of universal information and infinite wisdom. DNA spirals appears as pillars or antennas in support of her readiness. This card celebrates the transformation that is taking place in our experience of reality and our willingness to shift from the separation of duality consciousness to the certainty of our connectedness with all that is. Sacred geometry is one way that information and energy are entering consciousness at this time. You are gaining a greater appreciation for and are participating in the evolution of consciousness. As you continue your visionary path, allow your awareness and understanding of sacred geometry to nurture this evolution. Let this card be a signpost of your willingness to become a beacon of hope and a guiding light for those still caught in the old paradigm of separation. Remain receptive to the messages that you are receiving and give thanks for your conscious participation. Ooh, what an interesting card. So let's have a look. 10th insight. Oops. Let's have a look here. Okay, let's begin with the author's note. Like the Celestine Prophecy, this sequel is an adventure parable, an attempt to illustrate the ongoing spiritual transformation that is occurring in our time. My hope with both books has been to communicate what I call a consensus picture, a lived portrait of the new perceptions, feelings, and phenomena that are coming to define life as we enter the third millennium. Our greatest mistake, in my opinion, is to think that human spirituality is somehow already understood and established. If history tells us anything, it is that human culture and knowledge are constantly evolving. Only individual opinions are fixed and dogmatic. Truth is more dynamic than that, and the great joy of life is in letting go, and finding our own special truth that is ours to tell, and then watching the synchronistic way this truth evolves and takes a clearer form just when it's needed to impact someone's life. Together we are going somewhere, each generation building upon the accomplishments of the previous one. Destined for an end, we can only dimly remember we are all in the process of awakening and opening up to who we really are and what we came here to do, which is often a very difficult task. Yet I firmly believe that if we always integrate the best of the traditions we find before us and keep the process in mind, each challenge along the way, each interpersonal irritation can be overcome with a sense of destiny and miracle. I don't mean to minimize the formidable problems still facing humanity, only to suggest that each of us in our own way is involved in the solution. If we stay aware and acknowledge the great mystery that is life, we will see that we have been perfectly placed in exactly the right position to make all the difference in the world. J.R. Spring, 1996. I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was as a trumpet talking with me, which said, "Come up hither, and I will show you things which must be hereafter." And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and there was a rainbow around about the throne, in sight like unto an emerald. And around about the throne was 24 seats, and upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white raiment. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. Revelation. Right, the 10th insight. Imagine the path. I walked out to the edge of the granite overhung and looked northward at the scene below. Stretching across my view was a large Appalachian valley of striking beauty, perhaps 6 or 7 miles long and 5 miles wide. Along the length of the valley ran a winding stream that coursed through stretches of open meadowland and thick, colourful forests, old forests with trees standing hundreds of feet high. I glanced down at the crude map in my hand. Everything in the valley coincided with the drawing exactly. The steep ridge on which I was standing, the road leading down, the description of the landscape, the stream, the rolling foothills beyond. This had to be the place, Charlene had sketched on the note found in her office. Why had she done that, and why had she disappeared? Over a month had passed since Charlene had last contacted her associates at the research firm where she worked, and by the time Frank Sims, her office mate, had thought to call me, he'd become clearly alarmed. She often goes off on her own tangents, he had said, but she's never disappeared for this long before, and never when she's had meetings already set with long-term clients. Something's not right. How did you know to call me? I asked. He responded by describing part of a letter found in Charlene's office that I had written in the months earlier, chronicling my experiences in Peru. With it, he told me, was a scribbled note that contained my name and telephone number. I'm calling everyone I know who's associated with her, he added. So far, no one seems to know a thing. Judging from the letter, you're a friend of Charlene's. I was hoping you had heard from her. Sorry, I told him. I haven't talked to her in 4 months. Even as I'd said the words, I couldn't believe it had been that long. Soon after receiving my letter, Charlene had telephoned and left a long message on my answering machine, voicing her excitement about the insights and commenting on the speed with which knowledge of them seemed to be spreading. I remembered listening to Charlene's message several times, but I'd put off calling her back, telling myself that I would call later, maybe tomorrow, or the day after, when I felt ready to talk. I knew at the time that speaking with her would put me in the position of having to recall and explain the details of the manuscript, and I told myself I needed more time to think, to digest what had occurred. The truth, of course, was the parts of the prophecy still eluded me. Certainly I'd retained the ability to connect with the spiritual energy within. Great comfort to me, considering that everyone had fallen through with Marjorie, and I was now spending large amounts of time alone. And I was more aware than ever of intuitive thoughts and dreams, and the luminosity of a room or landscape. Yet at the same time, the sporadic nature of the coincidences had become a problem. I would fill up with energy, for instance, discerning the question for most of my life, and would usually perceive a clear hunch about what to do or where to go to pursue the answer. Yet, after acting accordingly, too often nothing of importance would occur. I would find no message, no coincidence. This was especially true when the intuition was to seek out someone I already knew to some extent, an old acquaintance, perhaps, or someone with whom I worked routinely. Occasionally this person and I would find some new point of interest, but just as frequently my initiative, in spite of my best efforts to send energy, would be completely rebuked, or worst, would begin with excitement, only to warp out of control, and finally die in a flurry of unexpected irritations and emotions. Such failure had not soured me on the process, but I'd realized something that was missing when it came to living the insights long term. In Peru, I'd been proceeding on momentum, often acting spontaneously, with a kind of faith born out of desperation. When I arrived back home, though, dealing again with my normal environment, often surrounded by outright skeptics, I seemed to lose the keen expectation or firm belief that my hunches were really going to lead somewhere. Apparently there was some vital part of the knowledge I'd forgotten, or perhaps not yet discovered. I'm just not sure what to do next, Charlene Associate had pressed. She has a sister, I think, somewhere in New York. You don't know how to contact her, do you? Or anyone else who might know where she is? I'm sorry, I said, I don't. Charlene and I are actually rekindling an old friendship. I don't remember any relatives, and I don't know who her friends are now. Well, I think I'm going to file a police report, unless you have a better idea. No, I think that would be wise. Are there any other leads? Only a drawing of some, could be a description of a place. It's hard to tell. Later, he had faxed me the entire note he had found in Charlene's office, including the crude sketch of intersecting lines and numbers with vague marks in the margins. And as I sat in my study, sorry, as I sat in my study comparing the drawing to the road numbers in an atlas of the South, I'd found what I suspected to be the actual location. Afterward, I had experienced a vivid image of Charlene in my mind, the same image I'd perceived in Peru when told of the existence of the 10th insight. Was her disappearance somehow connected to the manuscript? A whiff of wind touched my face, and I again studied the view below. Far to the left, at the western edge of the valley, I could make out a row of rooftops that had to be the town Charlene had indicated on the map. Stuffing the paper into my vest pocket, I made my way back down to the road and climbed into the Pathfinder. The town itself was small, a population of 2,000 according to the sign beside the first and only stoplight. Most of the commercial buildings lined just one street, running along the edge of the stream. I drove through the light, spotted a motel near the entrance to the National Forest, and pulled into a parking space facing an adjacent restaurant and pub. Several people were entering the restaurant, including a tall man with a dark complexion and jet black hair, carrying a large pack. He glanced back at me, and we momentarily made eye contact. I got out and locked the car, then decided on a hunch to walk through the restaurant before checking into the motel. Inside, the tables were near empty, just a few hikers at the bar, and some of the people who had entered ahead of me. Most were oblivious to my gaze, but as I continued to survey the room, I again met eyes with the tall man I had seen before. He was walking towards the rear of the room. He smiled faintly, held the eye contact another second, then walked out the back exit. I followed him through the exit. He was standing 20 feet away, bending over his pack. He was dressed in jeans, a western shirt and boots, and appeared to be about 50 years old. Behind him, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows along the tall trees and grass, and 50 yards away the stream flowed by, beginning its journey into the valley. He smiled half-heartedly and looked at me. "Another pilgrim?" he asked. "I'm looking for a friend," I said. "I had a hunch that you could help me." He nodded, studying the outlines on my body very carefully. Walking closer, he introduced himself as David Lone Eagle, explaining as though it was something I might need to know, that he was a direct descendant of the Native Americans who originally inhabited this valley. I noticed for the first time a thin scar on his face that ran from the edge of his left eyebrow all the way to his chin, just missing his eye. "You want some coffee?" he asked. "They're good at Perrier, in the saloon there, but lousy at coffee." He nodded towards an area near the stream where a small tent stood among 3 large poplars. Dozens of people were walking in the area, some of them along a path that crossed a bridge and led into the national forest. Everything appeared safe. "Sure," I replied. "That would be good." At the campsite, he lit a small butane stove, then filled a boiler with water and set it on the burner. "What's your friend's name?" he finally asked. "Charlene Billings." He paused and looked at me, and we gazed at each other. I saw a clear image in my mind's eye of him in another time. He was younger, dressed in buckskin, sitting in front of a large fire. Streaks of war paint adorned his face. Around him was a circle of people, mostly Native Americans, but including 2 whites, a woman, and a very large man. The discussion was heated. Some of the group wanted war, others desired reconciliation. He broke in, ridiculing the ones considering peace. How could they be so naive, he told them, after so much treachery? The white woman seemed to understand, but pleaded with him to hear it out. War could be avoided, she maintained, and the valley protected fairly, if the spiritual medicine was great enough. He rebuked her argument totally. Then, chiding the group, he mounted his horse and rode away. Most of the others followed. "Your instincts are good," David said, snapping me from my vision. He was spreading a homespun blanket between us, offering me a seat. "I know of her." He looked at me questioningly. "I'm concerned," I said. "No one has heard from her, and I just wanted to make sure she's okay, and we need to talk." "About the 10th insight?" he asked, smiling. "How did you know that?" "Just a guess. Many of the people coming to this valley aren't here because of the beauty of the national forest. They're here to talk about the insights. They think the 10th is somewhere out there. A few even claim to know what it says." He turned away and put a tea ball filled with coffee into steaming water. Something about his tone of voice made me think he was testing me, trying to check out whether I was who I claimed. "Where is Charlene?" I asked. He pointed a finger towards the east. In the forest. I've never met your friend, but I overheard her being introduced in the restaurant one night, and I've seen her a few times since. Several days ago I saw her again. She was hiking into the valley alone, and judging from the way she was packed, I'd say she's probably still out there. I looked in that direction. From this perspective, the valley looked enormous, stretching forever into the distance. Where do you think she was going? I asked. He stared at me for a moment. Probably towards the Sipsey Canyon. That's where one of the openings is found. He was studying my reaction. The openings? He smiled cryptically. That's right, the dimensional openings. I leaned over toward him, remembering my experience at Celestine ruins. Who knows about all this? Very few people. So far, it's all rumor, bits and pieces of information, intuition. Not a soul has seen a manuscript. Most of the people who come here looking for the 10th feel they're being significantly led, and they're genuinely trying to live the 9 insights, even though they complain that the coincidence guide them along for a while and then just stop. He chuckled lightly. But that's where we all are, right? The 10th insight is about understanding this whole awareness, the perception of mysterious coincidences, the growing spiritual consciousness on earth. The 9th insight disappears, all from the higher perspective of the higher other dimension, so that we can understand why this transformation is happening and participate more fully. How do you know that? I asked. He looked at me with piercing eyes, suddenly angry. I know. Well, for another moment his face remained serious, then his expression warmed again. He reached over and poured the coffee into 2 cups and handed one to me. My ancestors have lived near this valley for thousands of years, he continued. They believed this forest was a sacred site, midway between the upper world and the middle world here on earth. My people would fast and enter the valley on their vision quests, looking for their specific gifts, their medicine, the path they should walk in this life. My grandfather told me about a shaman who came from a faraway tribe and taught our people to search for what he called a state of purification. The shaman taught them to leave from this very spot, bearing only a knife, and to walk until the animals provided a sign, and then to follow until they reached what they called the sacred opening into the upper world. If they were worthy, if they had cleared the lower emotions, he told them, they might even be allowed to enter the opening and to meet directly with the ancestors, where they could remember not just their own vision, but the vision of the whole world. Of course, all that ended when the white man came. My grandfather couldn't remember how to do it, and neither can I. We're having to figure it out like everyone else. You're here looking for the 10th, aren't you? I asked. Of course, but all I seem to be doing is this penance of forgiveness. His voice became sharp again, and he suddenly seemed to be talking more to himself than to me. Every time I try to move forward, a part of me can't get past this resentment and the rage of what happened to my people. And it's not getting any better. How could it happen that our land was stolen? A way of life overrun, destroyed. Why would that be allowed? I wish it hadn't happened, I said. He looked at the ground and chuckled lowly again. I believe that. But still there is a rage that comes when I think of this valley being misused. You see the scar, he added, pointing to his face. I could have avoided the fight where this happened. Texas cowboys with too much to drink. I could have walked away, but for this anger burning within me. Isn't most of this valley now protected in the national forest? I asked. Only about half of it. North of the stream, the politicians always threaten to sell it or to allow development. What about the other half? Who owns that? For a long time, this area was owned mostly by individuals, but now there's a foreign registered corporation trying to buy it up. We don't know who is behind it, but some of the owners have been offered huge amounts to sell. He looked away momentarily, then said, My problem is I want the past 3 centuries to have happened differently. I resent the fact that Europeans began to settle on this continent with no regard for the people who were already here. It was criminal. I want it to have happened differently, as though I could have somehow changed the past. One way of life was important. We were learning the value of remembering. This was the great message the Europeans could have received from my people if they had stopped to listen. As he talked, my mind drifted into another daydream. 2 people, another a Native American and the same white woman, were talking on the banks of the small stream. Behind them was a thick forest. After a while, other Native Americans crowded around to hear their conversation. We can heal this, the woman was saying. I'm afraid we don't have enough yet, the Native American replied, his face expressing great regard for the woman. Most of the other chiefs had already left. Why not? Think of the discussions we've had. You yourself said that if there was enough faith, we could heal this. Yes, he replied, but faith is the certainty that comes from knowing how things should be. The ancestors know, but not enough of us here have reached that knowing. But maybe we can reach this knowledge now, the woman pleaded. We have to try. My thoughts were interrupted by the sight of several young Forest Service officers who were approaching an older man on the bridge. He had neatly cut grey hair and wore dress slacks and a starched shirt. As he moved, he seemed to limp slightly. Do you see the man with the officers? David asked. Yeah, I replied. What about him? I've seen him around here for the past 2 weeks. His first name is Feynman, I think. I don't know his last name. David leaned towards me, sounding for the first time as if he trusted me completely. Listen, something very strange is going on. For several weeks, the Forest Service seems to have been counting the hikers who go into the forest. They've never done that before. And yesterday someone told me they'd completely closed off the far eastern end of the wilderness. There are places in that area that are 10 miles from the nearest highway. Do you know how few people ever venture out that far? Some of us have begun to hear strange noises in that direction. What kind of noises? A dissonance of some kind. Most people can't hear it. Suddenly he was up on his feet, quickly taking down his tent. What are you doing here? I asked. I can't stay here, he replied. I've got to get into the valley. After a moment, he interrupted his work and looked at me again. Listen, he said, there's something you have to know. That man, Feynman, I saw your friend with him several times. What were they doing? Just talking. But I'm telling you, there's something wrong here. He began packing again. I watched him in silence for a moment. I had no idea what to think about this situation, but I sensed that he was right about Charlene being somewhere out in the valley. Let me get my equipment, he said. I'd like to go with you. No, he said quickly. Each person must experience the valley alone. I can't help you now. It's my own vision I must find. His face looked pained. Can you tell me exactly where this canyon is? Just follow the stream for about 2 miles. You'll come to another small creek that enters the stream from the north. Follow this creek for another mile. It will lead you right through the mouth of the Sipsey Canyon. I nodded and turned to walk away, but he grabbed my arm. Look, he said, you can find your friend if you raise your energy to another level. There are specific locations in the valley that can help you. The dimensional openings, I asked. Yes, there you can discover the perspective of the 10th insight. But to find these places, you must understand the true nature of your intuitions and how to maintain these mental images. Also watch the animals and you'll begin to remember what you're doing here in this valley, why we're all here together. But be very careful. Don't let them see you enter the forest, he thought for a moment. There's someone else out there, a friend of mine, Curtis Weber. If you see Curtis, tell him that you've talked to me and that I will find him. He smiled faintly and returning to folding his tent. I wanted to ask what he meant about intuition and watching the animals, but he avoided eye contact and stayed focused on his work. Thanks, I said. He waved slightly with one hand. Okay, that's it for today. Don't forget to check the links down below, check the links on my channel, like, subscribe and ring the bell so you know when the next video will be uploaded. Take care and blessed be.